He won the national championship with Florida State as a freshman, won the Heisman Trophy at only 19 years old, and was the undisputed #1 overall pick coming out of college. Then in the NFL, after throwing for over 5,000 yards and 30 interceptions in a single season, he lost his starting job and his team to a 42-year-old Tom Brady, who would lead the Bucs to a championship in the following season without him. Then he would head to New Orleans, sitting behind and becoming the successor to Hall of Fame quarterback Drew Brees. Not long after he took over, he would lose his starting job to Andy Dalton out of all people, and would become a backup quarterback to Derek Carr, and now Deshaun Watson in Cleveland. But how exactly did Jameis Winston go from this talented prospect to now just a pretty good bench warmer? Let's take a look. Jameis Winston was born and raised in Bessemer, Alabama. He attended Hueytown High School, where he made the varsity team for both football and baseball, and he was really good at both of them. Coming out of high school, Jameis had been considered the best quarterback in the class of 2012 and had also been drafted by the Texas Rangers in the MLB draft. Even though he was offered by the Rangers to play for them while in college, he instead decided to focus on playing football at Florida State. However, he would not be named a starter in his first year there, as he would be sitting behind quarterback E.J. Manuel. As a result, he would redshirt his freshman season and get the starting job the following season in 2013. In Week 1, Florida State will be facing the Pittsburgh Panthers. Jameis completed 25 of his 27 passes and racked up 356 passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns, along with a rushing touchdown. 5 touchdowns in his debut game was outstanding. However, it wasn't against a particularly good team, not compared to them at least. Florida State would dominantly win their first 5 games of the season. Their first truly good team would come in Game 6, when number 5 ranked Florida State would travel to play number 3 Clemson at their home stadium, also known as Death Valley. And I don't think those 80,000 Clemson fans were ready for what was going to happen that night. Jameis Winston and the Seminoles completely destroyed Clemson 51-14. Jameis threw for 444 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and also had a rushing touchdown. And from here on out, they blew out every single team they faced. 49-17, 41-14, 59-3 against Wake Forest, 59-3 against Syracuse, and also an absurd 80 points against Idaho. Even the ACC championship was no problem, as they blew out Duke 45-7. Florida State was really good. No team they played this season even came close to beating them, except for in the final game of the season, the national championship against the Auburn Tigers. Florida State started the game stagnant in the first half, but in the second half, Jameis Winston and the Seminoles overcame an 18-point deficit to win 34-31. Jameis was named the offensive MVP of the game, throwing for 2 touchdowns, one of which was a game winner, and also 235 passing yards. Florida State ended the season undefeated with a record of 14-0, and Jameis had an incredible year. Over 4,000 passing yards, 40 touchdowns, only 10 interceptions, and a 67% completion rate. As expected, he earned himself a lot of awards and trophies. The most important one by far, though, was winning the Heisman Trophy at the age of 19 years old. In 2014, Jameis would return to Florida State, and yet again, the Seminoles would go undefeated, at least until they faced Oregon in the Rose Bowl, where they got absolutely embarrassed 59-20. Jameis Winston played significantly worse in his sophomore season. He did have almost 4,000 yards and 25 touchdowns, but he had a whopping 18 interceptions. After only 2 years in college, Jameis declared for the 2015 NFL Draft, where he would be drafted first overall, in large part because of his undefeated 2013 season. But the truth is, Jameis had some pretty big flaws, most notably his turnovers. I think one scout perfectly captures Jameis's problem. They say that Winston is very gifted, and he has great size and strength, but also says Winston can be erratic at times with his arm and inconsistent reading defenses. He'll make bad decisions, and that big receiver Kelvin Benjamin bails him out of trouble. Jameis had some flaws for sure, but a lot of teams were willing to turn a blind eye. One of these teams was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the team that would eventually select Jameis with the #1 overall pick. Jameis Winston would easily win the starting job with the Buccaneers. I mean, the team was just coming off a 2-14 season. His debut would come in Week 1 of the 2015 season against #2 overall pick, Marcus Mariota. His very first passing attempt in the NFL got intercepted and returned for a touchdown, and the rest of the game wouldn't be any better. Jameis and the Buccaneers would get significantly outplayed by Tennessee, losing 42-14. 2015 was filled with ups and downs for Jameis Winston. There were games where he threw 4 interceptions, and there were also games where he threw 5 touchdowns. But as the season went on, he was showing improvement. He made the All-Rookie team, and surprisingly, he was actually named a Pro Bowler as well, which so far is the only time that's ever happened in his career. 2016 was a better year for Jameis and the Buccaneers, but it was also another season filled with ups and downs. He led the Bucs to a 9-7 record, their first winning season in 6 years. However, they still failed to make the playoffs. This season, Jameis threw for 28 touchdowns, but he also had 18 interceptions. Up to this point, you can probably tell that Jameis has a really bad turnover problem. He's had it his entire career, going all the way back to high school. But these 18 interceptions would be nothing compared to what Jameis Winston would do pretty soon. In 2015, the year when Jameis arrived, the team was pretty bad, and it stayed that way for a good amount of seasons. But 2019 is when the Buccaneers started to genuinely get good. They improved significantly on their O-line, defense, and their receivers. 2019 was a season where Jameis had a serious opportunity to make his first playoff run ever, but it was also a make or break year. This was his 5th year with the Buccaneers, meaning he could either get a contract extension or else he would be heading to free agency. 2019 would be another season filled with ups and downs. In week 1, Jameis would throw for 194 yards on a 55% completion rate and got picked off 3 times, 2 of those being returned for touchdowns. The Bucs lost 31-17 against the 49ers, really because of Jameis Winston. Then in week 4, he threw for 385 yards and 4 touchdowns in a shootout against the Rams. The Bucs won 55-40, and he won NFC Offensive Player of the Week. And then just 2 weeks later against the Panthers, Jameis had 400 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and 5 interceptions.
Winston for the end zone, it's Evans, and oh gosh.
I wasn't kidding when I said the season was filled with ups and downs. Unfortunately for Winston, this inconsistency continued for the entire season, and as a result, he had one of the craziest seasons ever. 5,109 passing yards, 33 passing touchdowns, and 30 interceptions. Ironically enough, his last passing attempt with the Bucs was a pick 6, just like how his first pass was also a pick 6. Maybe it was a symbolic goodbye because after that, the Buccaneers had had enough of Jameis Winston. He was let go in free agency and the Buccaneers ended up signing another quarterback. And well, the rest is history. Surprisingly, or maybe not, Winston would get a lot of opportunities in free agency. But there was one team that really stuck out to Winston. One team, despite not offering as much money as others, would allow him to learn directly from a Hall of Fame quarterback and a Hall of Fame coach. This team was the New Orleans Saints. The Saints would sign Jameis to a 1-year deal. He would be sitting behind a 41-year-old Drew Brees for almost the entire season, and it was pretty well known that this was looking like Drew's last season in the NFL. So Winston would get a full year to sit behind and learn from Drew Brees, as well as getting a really strong opportunity to become the starter in the 2021 season. And sure enough, after losing in a wild card to the Buccaneers, Drew Brees would call it a wrap in the offseason, capping off 20 seasons in the NFL. And the next man up was of course Jameis Winston. He signed another 1-year deal and was named a starter for the 2021 season. Jameis would be put to the test in week 1 against the Green Bay Packers, and surprisingly, he did really well, throwing for 150 yards and 5 touchdowns and absolutely blowing out the Aaron Rodgers-led Packers 38-3. Jameis Winston actually started the season off pretty good. His worst game came in week 2 where he threw 2 interceptions and lost to the Panthers, but after that he kept interceptions to a minimal, at least in the last few games he played, because in week 8 against the Buccaneers, an illegal tackle from his former teammate Devin White ended the season right then and there. Jameis tore both his ACL and his MCL. It was really upsetting because up to that point, Jameis had played the best football in his NFL career. In the 7 games he played, he led the Saints to a 5-2 record, throwing 14 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions, which by his standards is just unheard of. The Saints lost 7 of the remaining 11 games without Jameis and ended with a record of 9-8. And to make things worse, after that season, Sean Payton announced that he was retiring from the NFL. A retirement that only lasted a year, by the way, but with his departure from New Orleans, Pete Carmichael would take over as offensive play caller. And let's just say, he wasn't the best at his job. Jameis would get another opportunity in the 2022 season, and he would actually play good in week 1 against the Falcons. After being down 16 points in the 4th quarter, Jameis Winston and Michael Thomas almost single-handedly cut that lead down to 0 and won 27-26. Unfortunately, in this game, Jameis suffered some back injuries that he tried to play through in the next 2 games, but his body just couldn't keep going. And so the backup quarterback Andy Dalton would take his place while he was injured. Jameis Winston would recover later in the season, but he never got that starting job back. In fact, the head coach Dennis Allen wholeheartedly believed that Andy Dalton was a better option over Jameis Winston, even though he clearly wasn't. I mean, the Saints ended the season 7-10 with one of the worst offenses in the league. Obviously, Jameis wasn't happy. The Saints would re-sign him again in 2023, but strictly as a backup quarterback to Derek Carr. It was pretty glaring that Dennis Allen did not trust in Jameis at all. This mutual disagreement led to the Saints not re-signing him in 2024. Instead, it would be Cleveland that would offer him a job, but as a backup quarterback behind Deshaun Watson. And that is where Jameis is at right now. At one point, Jameis was on top of the football world, winning the national championship, becoming the youngest Heisman winner at the time, and being the #1 overall pick, to now at only 30 years old, being seemingly just a permanent backup quarterback. Injuries and bad luck played a big role in Jameis' decline, but at the end of the day, the main thing that really hurt Jameis a lot is just those interceptions. 2021 really was the only outlier in his entire career. Who knows where he would be right now if he never got injured that season. For all we know, he could have been the starting quarterback for the Saints right now. Jameis' career is filled with so many ups and downs, it's actually crazy. Which is why I genuinely think that Jameis might just be one of the most inconsistent quarterbacks, not just right now, but in NFL history.